Good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series. My name is Lauri Regan, and on behalf of MEF, I want to thank you all for joining today and for your continued support of our important work. I also want to remind everyone that we're holding a special podcast this afternoon at 4 p.m. featuring a number of the Middle East Forum's experts discussing what's transpiring in the Islamic Republic of Iran with the most widespread protests that we've seen in over 4 decades and what we might expect to see as events unfold. If you have not already done so, you can register on MEF's website. Right now, I am pleased to introduce Joe Adam George, MEF's lead research analyst for Islamist threats in Canada and a foreign policy and national security analyst with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, covering Islamist extremism in the West, terror financing, and geopolitical developments in the Middle East and South Asia, and their impact on Canada and the United States. Joe is joining us to share his insights and thoughts on Islamist threats in Canada. Today's podcast is being recorded and will be available for future viewing, so please do share the link with those in your network who you believe will be interested in this very important topic. Welcome, Joe, and thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. I hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Lauri. Good afternoon, everyone. So just to talk about the problem of radical Islam in Canada, this isn't something that just blew up post-October 7 attacks in Israel. This has been in the making for decades, since the 60s, with the Tablighi Jamaati, which is a movement that has its ideological underpinnings with the Taliban, as you know, a terrorist group in Afghanistan. And then subsequently, with the immigration that flew in from South Asia, the movement became a force to reckon with in Canada, followed by immigration from South Asia and North Africa, or rather from the Middle East and North Africa. You had the Saudi Wahhabism and Salafism movement also transpire and gain root in Canada, similar to what happened in the United States. So you saw the makings of radical Islam for a good 50 to 60 years now. Since the 90s, this has morphed into something far more sinister, with Hamas and Hezbollah using Canada as a primary hub for terror financing and also for transnational criminal activities, anything from drug trafficking to money laundering. In the recent past, in the last decade, so to speak, because of the permissive mass immigration policies under the Liberal government led by former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, particularly in the aftermath of the Syrian civil war, as a consequence in which he opened the doors to over 100,000 Syrian refugees, many of whom were not properly vetted. We are now seeing in the post-October 7 era a significant problem of not just foreign interference and Islamist activity by groups like Qatar and Turkey and the Muslim Brotherhood, but you're also seeing a significant burgeoning problem with youth radicalization in Canada. And this is something that is only going to look far worse, not just for Canada, but it is something for concern for the United States, simply because, as you know, Laura, we share the world's longest unguarded border with the US. And for the Islamists, it's not Canada that is of particular concern, that Canada is simply a means to an end. Their ultimate goal is to topple the United States and take over America, because in their eyes, the United States is the great Satan. So this is something for American officials and security officials to be very concerned about, that what's looming on this side of the border is something far sinister. Just to give you just to quantify how this threat looks like, from Canada, about 200 people traveled to Syria to join ISIS and fight for ISIS. Now, compare that with the 300 that went from the United States to, or at least attempted to travel to Syria to join ISIS. Now, if you were to look at that from a per capita basis, that is, compare our population sizes, which is Canada is about 40 million, versus the United States population of about 340, 350 million. That works out to a 1:6 ratio, which means that for every one person from the United States, there were six from Canada. That's the level of radicalization that you're looking at Canada, which I think American officials need to recognize.
So, thank you for that. What do you, just to stay on the topic of youth radicalization, what do you think is causing that? I mean, I understand that there's been an influx of Syrian refugees and perhaps other Islamists, but to have such a vast radicalization of those numbers, what else could be causing that?
Sure. Firstly, a lot of it is because of the ISIS online propaganda, which CSIS and other security agencies have ascertained is a key driving factor. The other factor in the case of Canada, which is unique in the case of Canada, is economic. A lot of youth are disoriented and disappointed by the economic prospects that they are facing, and so um, it makes them vulnerable to ideologies like like Islamism, where they fall prey and are easily radicalized by sinister characters in our society. So, and then again, the the government, the Liberal government, that is, both under the current Prime Minister Carney and the former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, have repeatedly failed to call out radical Islam as a problem. So you have an ideologically captured government which does not want to deal with this problem, and instead chooses to fund left-leaning groups which look into far-right extremism in Canada. So, and then we have the problem, like I said, the government patronizes groups, Islamist groups, gives them funding, a lot of which ends up in the hands of terrorists in the Middle East. So, Laurie, let's just say that the government has created a permissive environment for vote bank politics, which is exacerbating the youth radicalization problem. And I should add that because the vote bank problem in Canada is pretty serious because the Muslim vote is very powerful. You got about 2 million Muslims living in the country, which make up for about 5% of the total population. Now, this is very significant because the Muslim vote bank um, can hold influence in about 60 to 80 ridings across Canada, which is very significant given that we got about 343 seats in the House of Commons. So as you can see, if any government, any party is looking to form a majority government, 60 to 80 seats is a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Um, where does I'd like you to spend a few minutes also discussing the academy, because I would imagine, I mean, Canadian universities are hotbeds of pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel activism. At least in the U.S., the Trump administration has intervened in order to protect Jewish students and are attempting to impact the leftist indoctrination that's pervaded the academy here for so long. I don't see that will and that under Prime Ministers Trudeau or now Carney, who are certainly not Donald Trump when it comes to addressing these issues. So, has the academy played a role in radicalization as well?
Oh, absolutely. Or you're seeing a lot of this. And it's not, mind you, it's just not in the protest, but also in the academic side of things, where I'm seeing Islamist activists push academic papers calling for reviewing or downgrading our national security rules around terror designations or our anti-money laundering and terror financing regulations as well, and that's very concerning. And if you can see, if you read the literature, you will see that a lot of it, the material, the language, is taken from social justice and human rights uh, you know, a jargon. For example, or you see stuff like white logic being used, and they claim that racism and Islamophobia is a key factor in designating groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, which in their view are essentially resistance movements and are unfairly branded as terrorist organizations. So and mind you, these academic papers make their way the government. We have, as you know, Amira El Gawabi, who is Canada's representative for Islamophobia, who is lobbying various government departments, including those involved with national security and immigration, pushing for special privileges for these kind of groups. And then, and to your point about the universities, it's on the protest side. What I've seen is Muslim Brotherhood groups like Islamic Relief Canada are working with Palestinian youth movements and so on in fundraising. So there is, unfortunately, like in the US, we do not have in Canada any source of any way of identifying foreign funding. In the US, universities are required to disclose funding, the funding sources, whereas in Canada, there is no such requirement for universities to do so. So what you're seeing now in the post-October 7 era is this, case of foreign funding coming in from places like Qatar and Turkey or Iran, and you're seeing the creation of Islamic institutions at key universities across Canada, uh, essentially peddling anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia.
So, I wanted to ask you. I'm gonna quote from an article that you published in the National Post in December, and that you noted that recent attacks by ISIS or inspired by ISIS, quote, do not signal a sudden ISIS resurgence. They reflect a harsh reality. ISIS was never defeated. It has adapted, endured, and remains a tenacious counterterrorism threat with global reach. You added, quote, far from fading into irrelevance, the group continues to operate at scale, exploiting political instability, social fractures, and digital ecosystems across the continents. Can you focused on ISIS at the beginning of your talk. Can you elaborate on that and perhaps discuss the parallels between the Hanukkah massacre in Australia and incidents in Canada? Because I'll just add that while you talked about the threat that this is facing, that this is what's happening in Canada for the U.S., I would argue that the Islamists are posing a threat to the entirety of the West.
Well, absolutely, Laurie. In the case of ISIS with Canada, it's actually more very relevant. In early December, there was Global News reported, actually, which is, by the way, a Canadian newspaper, about three individuals being arrested on charges of kidnapping and specifically targeting, members of the Jewish communities, specifically girls. One of them was charged for being a part of being inspired by ISIS. So clearly, the problem that you saw in the Bondi Beach massacre in Australia is not exclusive to Australia alone, or for the matter, like I said, the ISIS problem is a problem that the West faces in general. But in Canada, this is more pronounced. Like I said, it brings me back to my earlier point about youth radicalization. Bec- Because of Canada's uh, issues with vote bank politics, multiculturalism, and this strong culture of wokeism and political correctness, it makes it a very permissive environment for Islamists to push their propaganda and engage with youth, vulnerable youth. Many of them who have not really, are often not necessarily newcomers, mind you. Many of them are second generation kids, and yet they are often radicalized by a lot of them, not necessarily, again, not necessarily linked to Muslim Brotherhood groups. There are other groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir or Tablighi Jamaati that also operate in Canada, that are also involved in radicalizing this youth. So, and a lot of these kids eventually, like I said, with ISIS in Canada, uh, I'd say it's more relevant and it's more concerning for the U.S. because if you remember, Laurie, back in 2024, there was a Pakistani student who came to Canada on a student visa, who was attempting to cross into the US to conduct a 9/11 style attack on the first anniversary of the October 7 attacks in New York. And if it wasn't for the FBI, um, this guy would have actually been successful. Again, that individual was inspired by ISIS. We had a case that same year about a father and son. Again, they were Syrian refugees, mind you, who came during, thanks to Trudeau's permissive mass immigration policies. They again attempted to conduct a mass attack in downtown Toronto, and they were also stopped thanks to US and French intelligence sources. So with Canada, what you are seeing is the creation of an environment where you're seeing multiple threat actors make it very easy for groups like ISIS to radicalize youth. And not just, like I said, this threat is not contained within Canada. It also is targeting the United States.
Thank you for that. And thank you for addressing the fact that there's a lot of second generation Canadians that are being radicalized. Somebody had asked that question, so you addressed that. Thank you. Um, uh, there's a lot of Canadians actually that are watching, and they seem to be wondering, what as individuals can they do? And I'm curious if you can talk about the general population, the Canadian population, and where they stand because they have now elected two liberal administrations that are not really addressing the issue. And there is somebody that's asking that will the conservatives take this problem more seriously, and what's the chance that they will win the next election, and when is that election?
Sure. I mean, we just had an election, federal election last year, so I'm not expecting anything in the next 3 years at least. Will the conservatives take national security seriously? Absolutely, and that's traditionally been the case. If you saw in the case with the last conservative prime minister that we had, Stephen Harper, yeah, it was something that he and his government took very seriously. Unfortunately, in the case of the current Liberal government, as I mentioned before, they're very obsessed with vote bank politics. Everything comes down to votes. So it's not just the Islamists who benefit out of it; it's the Chinese Communist Party, the Sikh extremists known as Khalistanis. So you see, there are a lot of bad actors who benefit out of uh, the way in which liberals like to conduct business and to stay in power. So, um, what people could do, I mean, and unfortunately, the case of Canada, because there is a general perceived understanding that Canadians are only mildly patriotic, and there's this very weak sense of national identity, um, unlike in the United States. So it makes it all the more easier for Islamists to run roughshod with their activities. So the one way uh, looking at this problem is for Canadians to be more involved in trying to in raising up this problem at the grassroots level, and pushing back on policies, especially in the education system, because there are what I've seen in the case of Canada is the two sectors where these Islamists consistently target because they know they can easily will influence there is the education system and the government. So if they can influence the youth and the next generation, then you have in the next 10, 15 years, you have Canada that is highly radicalized. And it's already happening in the school system. But I don't think a lot of parents recognize that. So I think it's very important for parents to also start being more active and pushing back on these woke school boards that peddle anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia and so on. So that's one way at the grassroots level. The other bit is for communities, like-minded communities, not just Jews and Christians, but also the Hindus or the Chinese, Buddhists, you name them all, and even Muslims, mind you, even secular Muslims who see this as a problem and that plagues their communities should all bandy together to lobby their elected officials to push back on this threat.
Someone else asked where the federal government has abrogated its responsibilities to confront radical Islam and combat anti Semitism. What has been the roles of the provincial premiers?
Oh, it's no different, unfortunately. If you can see the weekly pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protests happening, and you're seeing the Islamic prayers happen right in the at key intersections across key cities. We had this instance just this past holiday season where one of the biggest shopping centers in Toronto, Eaton Center, was just taken over by pro-Hamas radicals. So Christmas shoppers could not even enjoy holiday shopping either. And then we had the instance where New Year's Eve in Vancouver, these guys are taking over key intersections and block traffic. So this problem is certainly not exclusive to the federal government alone. The provincial government as well, Lauri, are equally at fault. Like I said, the vote bank politics problem plagues the entire electorate, all levels of government, from municipal to federal. So no one wants to do anything about it because why address something, like I said, at the end of the day, if it's going to hurt your votes, why would you want to do that? Jews form are only a small minority. They just are about 600,000 Jews in Canada, which is, like I said, as you can tell, I mean, that's nothing compared to 2 million. So you don't need to be a political guru to figure out that it makes no sense to side with, the Jewish community and protect them when at the cost of your votes.
I mean, I would argue that we're seeing that there's a lot of parallels in what's happening with Canada and the U.S. and, of course, Western Europe, including the U.K. I mean, the
Correct.
U.S. has had an open border for 4 years. It didn't involve vetting who was coming in. We too have identity-based politics and Muslim Brotherhood aligned NGOs and Islamists in high office. Where do you see like these leftist policies that allow this extremist ideology to take hold across the West? Like in Canada, do you also have the same red-green alliance that we're seeing taking hold in the U.S.?
Oh, absolutely. It's no different, Laurie. We have, in fact, in many ways, the problem is pronounced in Canada. Like I mentioned before, Canada is arguably one of the most woke countries in the world. And then you have multiculturalism, which is official state policy, instated by former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau since in the 1970s. So when you throw all of that in the mix, all of this benefits Islamist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood. So yes, the leftists, mind you, before the October 7 attacks, these two groups found each other on opposite sides. When leftist groups were pushing LGBTQ and DEI stuff in the education sector, Muslim parents were extremely concerned. So they actually found themselves fighting against these groups. But in the October 7 attacks have actually brought them together because they share a common hatred, obviously, for Jews and Israel and so on. So yes, so this is where we find what I'm seeing is not just school boards, but also trade unions across not just the public and private sector, but even at the federal government level. I'm seeing at the federal level where Islamist groups are encouraging Muslim male employees not to shake hands with their female counterparts. And they're also seeking special privileges like exclusive prayer rooms as well. And also, and they're also encouraging them to share Islam and to convert their fellow colleagues as well. So you are seeing and all of this is being allowed by leftist ideologies. Like I said, the the Marconi government is I mean, this is a making in the last 10 years. We are seeing a lot of ideologues, leftist ideologues, capture key positions in the government, and they are enabling Islamists to just run loose.
Are you seeing Islamists also? I mean, you did mention election, it's office holders, but part of the Muslim Brotherhood plan, and it's been in writing and it's on video
Yeah.
that from like the
Fine.
late '80s to early '90s. It was to start at local school board elections and town halls, and now in the U.S. we've got Gracie Mansion in New York City is occupied by basically an Islamist who wouldn't condemn globalize the Intifada. So in Canada, are you and in the UK, there's the London mayor, Sadiq Khan. Are you
Yeah.
seeing a similar high office positions being held by Islamists?
Oh yeah, as I mentioned before, Laurie, we have Amira El Gawabi, who is Canada's representative for Islamophobia. She has been well documented for pretty wild positions on Canada Day. She called that, a festival that's based on Judeo-Christian values, and also she went after the French Quebecers, calling them racist. And mind you, Amira El Gawabi, uh, used to be the communications officer with the National Council of Canadian Muslims, which was formerly known as CARE Canada, as you know, which is the Council of American Islamic Relations. That was the Canada chapter. So, in the aftermath of the Holy Land Foundation trial in 2011, they decided to rebrand themselves as NCCM to avoid any kind of scrutiny. So, Amira is again one such individual. There are many other people across key levels of government. Um, like I said, but then it's not just about holding positions. It's also, like I said, Laurie, at the grassroots, they are influencing the education system. And the school boards, as I mentioned before, are very woke, and they don't push back. In fact, they enable them. So there is, and it's the problem. What they're now faced with is not just pushing radical ideologies like anti-Palestinian racism, but now they're also in some cases, what I've been told is they're explicitly teaching Islam in classrooms as well.
Frightening, frightening. So somebody wanted to understand the Muslim population. How many Muslims live in in Canada, and are they citizens? And I'm going to tie in a second question that someone asked about that, who said he had traveled extensively throughout Canada and noticed that radical Islamists are not as prevalent in the maritime provinces in Alberta and are seemingly concentrated in the major cities in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I wouldn't. The thing is, very little research is done on those sides of those provinces per se. It is not to suggest that nothing isn't happening there. Yes, we see more of their activity in places like Ontario and Quebec, where they are concentrated. But it would be wrong to suggest that there's nothing happening in Alberta. In fact, the Alberta government not too long ago approved on halal mortgages and so on. So, and there are, as far as I'm aware, a lot of Islamist groups pushing the same kind of propaganda. Like I said, it's not often reported. And Canada is a huge country, so it's hard, even for, like I said, there's not many people who actually cover Islamist extremism like me. So it's hard to sit and document what's going on specifically in the Maritimes or in places like Manitoba. Although I know that there are cases where I've identified serious, I mean, definitely provable cases of Islamist activity. To the question about the Muslim population, as I mentioned before, again, it's about 2 million now. The 2021 census showed roughly around 2 million. I imagine it exceeded that. So you're looking at about 5% of Canada's population, which is about 41 million. So that's
We're
where we are.
Yeah, thank you. We're running out of time, but I just really quickly wanted to ask, somebody was wondering whether Canada has a law separating church from state as the US does.
Oh, I'm sorry, Laurie, could you just repeat that again?
Does Canada have a law separating church and state the way the U.S. does?
Well, yeah, yes. I mean, well, we do have that, and also, but the point is not so much about the separation of the church and state, Laurie. It's that they have created an environment for, um, radical ideologies. I mean, which specifically the Islamist group to leverage. So whether doesn't matter which religion is in question, that is that is trying to influence government. In this case, it's obviously Islamist. So uh, regardless of whether we have one or not, the Islamists are certainly benefiting because at this point in time, they're the ones who are highly active in the political and social spheres. um, it's definitely not the Christian or the Jewish community. And mind you, the reason why they are so successful, I always tell this, is because it's their sophistication is not in their literature or or the way they go about doing things, which is pretty chaotic and very in your face and provocative. Their sophistication lies in the fluidity, the way in which they operate without any egos, which you see. Whereas if you see in the Jewish or the Christian communities, there's a lot of infighting involved. You do. Whereas with these guys, there is no such problems. You often use the analogy of the human body. If one of these guys were the hand and the other guy was one of them was the leg, the hand will not attempt to do what the leg is trying to do, and vice versa. So everybody knows their roles. And so, for example, if the NCCM is focused on influencing government policy, it does not get involved in other activities, which have to do with grassroots influencing, because that is somebody else's domain. So they operate in a very fluid nature, and which is extremely concerning, and which is why I don't think Canadians, or even for the matter, our security agencies recognize the way in which they operate. And that, again, it ties into, like you said, Laurie, before, about the Muslim Brotherhood motto, or like what they said. They've clearly laid out about their strategy of taking over the West. All of this, there are clues given in their strategy, but somehow I don't think our security agencies or the government is willing to address this threat in that way.
Thank you so much, Joe. Our time has come to a close, and I appreciate you joining us this afternoon. It was really informative, and I thank everybody in the audience for joining as well. Hope to see you all at 4 p.m. for MEF special podcast on Iran, as well as on Wednesday at 3 p.m. with Ashley Perry on Israel Insider. Thank you again. I wish everybody a wonderful afternoon.